Ex-husband paid my boyfriend to ruin my life, break my family apart and turning my kids against me after I divorced him, while my BF hid the truth for 9 years. A few months back, I celebrated my 65th birthday. My significant other, Albert, he's 67, and I have been together for about 11 years. I have 2 adult children from a prior marriage, a daughter named Fiona, who's 43, and a son, Louis, he's 40. For a long time, almost 10 years, I was completely out of touch with them. There's a whole story behind that, which I'll share later. But ever since Fiona and Louis stopped speaking to me, I've been focusing on moving forward and creating a good life with Albert. I honestly struggled with feeling down for a very long while, but eventually, I found a sense of contentment and real peace. That is, until my ex-husband, Curtis, re-entered the picture and threw everything into turmoil. I've known Curtis, also 67, for most of my life. Our dads were in the same professional circles, so we saw each other as children at work functions. However, we never really interacted. He started showing interest in me when we were teenagers. He was always flirting when we'd meet, and then he started actively trying to get my attention. He'd even come to my school and take me out. I have to say, I enjoyed the attention. It was nice to feel wanted, and I appreciated how much effort he put in. At first, things with Curtis were wonderful. He was a true gentleman, always considerate and kind. He was a very traditional, take charge kind of guy. He loved the idea of being the provider. He always took the lead in planning dates and activities. He generally made all the choices, from everyday things like where we'd eat to more significant ones, like whether or not I should go to the local community college. I didn't really object. I liked having someone so decisive in my life, and I usually went along with his decisions. Sometimes, though, I felt a little frustrated that my own thoughts weren't really considered. I've always been someone who avoids conflict, so I just tried to ignore it and go with the flow. Since Curtis's choices seemed reasonable at the time, and they weren't hurting me, I just let him take the reins. After high school, I decided to get a job. College didn't really appeal to me. I was eager to learn practical skills and, most importantly, start earning my own money. My family wasn't wealthy, so financial independence felt very important. I wanted to be able to support my parents and have my own income so I wouldn't be reliant on anyone. Curtis wasn't keen on the idea of me going to college. He was very protective, and he said he didn't want me around other young men, claiming they'd only have one thing on their minds, and that I was too naive. He was actually happy when I said I wanted to work instead. Even so, he still tried to talk me out of working. He insisted he wanted to provide for me, even though he understood how much financial freedom meant to me. I held firm, and, though he wasn't thrilled, I got a job at a local diner as a line cook. I've always loved cooking, and this felt like a great opportunity to develop my abilities. A few years later, when I turned 21, Curtis asked me to marry him, and we had the wedding a few months after that. We moved into the house Curtis had inherited from his parents. Curtis was very attentive. He made sure I felt settled and secure in the new area. He always kept the kitchen stocked, and he bought me anything I asked for. I felt very happy. A few months after the wedding, he started pushing me to quit my job again, saying that his income was good enough and we didn't need the extra money. When I resisted, he'd get upset, saying that me working made it seem like he couldn't provide for his wife. He became increasingly possessive, even to the point of not wanting me to chat with the neighbors or go to the store by myself. He eventually agreed to let me keep working, but only if I handed over my entire paycheck to him each month, so he could manage our finances. When I was expecting Fiona, I was very ill and ended up delivering her prematurely. Fiona was in the hospital's special care unit for a month. Even after we brought her home, she was still fragile. Curtis insisted it was best if I quit my job to care for her until she was stronger. I agreed. My baby needed me. Thankfully, Fiona grew stronger, and by the time she was 2, I was thinking about going back to work. Curtis was against it. He used Fiona as a reason. He reasoned with me that staying a few more years would be beneficial, saying that she was too little to be without her mother. I then became pregnant with Louis, and a few years after, when I tried to find work again, Curtis absolutely refused to discuss it. He told me my role was to be a mother and homemaker, and that my children needed me. He said there was no reason for me to work when my only responsibility was to care for our children and the house. He claimed he felt insulted that I wanted to work, even though he was taking such good care of us, and that it was disrespectful to him. I didn't see at the time how he was using my emotions and making me feel guilty to keep me at home. I always knew he disliked the idea of me working, but using our daughter as a way to control me felt wrong. I started to feel more and more frustrated with him, but I kept quiet to avoid arguments. Curtis had a way of making me feel guilty about everything, even things I couldn't control. I remember one specific incident. He told me that I was a terrible mother because I was always thinking about my work, and that's the reason that Fiona was born too early and with so many health issues. The statement made me feel terrible. We ended up having a major argument, which was so draining that I went to stay with my mother for a couple of days. Curtis later apologized, somehow persuading me to return home. That was our pattern. We'd have awful fights, and then he'd switch to being loving and remorseful, pleading for forgiveness, and, like a fool, I'd go back. I remember one time, a few months after the incident, I tried talking to Curtis calmly. I told him that Fiona and Louie were growing and needed me less. He was adamant, and in the heat of anger, he shouted, "You will never work as long as you are living under my roof. You are a mother and a wife, and that is all you will ever be." Over the years, things deteriorated further. Curtis started to micromanage every part of my life. He demanded that I never mention work again, and I was expected to fulfill my daily tasks, which included caring for the children and handling all the housework. Even when I finished my chores, I wasn't allowed to see friends, go out, or even visit my own parents without his approval. He wouldn't let me get a driver's license and discouraged me from using public transportation, making me completely reliant on him for getting around. He dictated what I could wear, and if he didn't approve of my outfit, he'd start a fight. I wasn't permitted to express any dissatisfaction or even offer my own thoughts. He made all the choices, even those related to the kids. I felt this was unfair, as they were my children too. They were miserable at the school they were attending, they often complained about other kids picking on them, and pleaded with me to discuss changing schools with Curtis, but he refused to listen. He didn't care about anyone else's feelings. I remember one incident where Louie came home crying after a particularly bad day at school. I tried to comfort him and promised I'd talk to Curtis. When I brought it up, Curtis scoffed, "They're just being soft. They need to toughen up. Changing schools won't solve anything. They'll face bullies everywhere." I tried to explain that it was more than just typical bullying, but he cut me off, saying, "I've made my decision. End of discussion." As the children got older, I focused all my energy on them, making sure they had everything they needed. They were my top concern. Curtis had, in a sense, turned me into a homemaker. All the ambition and curiosity I had as a young woman had vanished. I did everything to keep him happy, even things I didn't want to do, and my whole personality had shifted. He reveled in my submissiveness and obedience. He loved to parade me around, calling me the ideal wife and bragging about how he was the man of the house, providing for his family like a true, responsible man. It was as if he had some kind of insecurity. He seemed to believe that if I had any input, it would somehow diminish his masculine authority, as if my having any kind of voice threatened his control. He would even make comments to our friends, saying things like, "Look at my wonderful wife, always so agreeable. A real woman knows her place." These comments always made me deeply uncomfortable, but I never said anything. By the time Fiona started college, I was completely fed up. Any affection I had for Curtis had disappeared a long time ago, and everything came to a head one evening. I had started experimenting with making homemade sauces, like marinara and pesto, in my kitchen, and whenever we had guests, they raved about them and asked for the recipes. I kept them secret and offered to make batches for them instead. Several people suggested I should start selling them because they were so delicious. I doubted anyone would actually buy them, but I started receiving a few orders from friends. Curtis despised this. He called it a pointless activity and insisted I stop because I was making him look bad. I told him that I had always complied with his wishes, but I genuinely believed my sauce business had potential. A huge argument ensued. I had an order due the next day, and Curtis, in a fit of rage, shattered all the jars of sauce on the kitchen floor, warning me that if I ever defied him again, I would face severe consequences. I remember picking up the glass, crying at the mess, and Curtis stood over me. His face was red with fury, and he said, "This is what happens when you don't listen. You're my wife, and you will do as I say." That incident made me realize how far he was willing to go. He showed no respect or value of my effort. That was the final breaking point. I gathered my belongings and left. I was genuinely afraid for my safety this time. I refused to let him manipulate me into returning. I was determined to break free from his control. He tried every tactic to get me back, even resorting to emotional blackmail, claiming he would hurt himself, but I knew that if I gave in, he might hurt me. I resolved to get a divorce. He was enraged and created a huge scene, but I remained resolute. The divorce was a lengthy and difficult process, but once it was finalized, I felt incredibly relieved. The children were older and leading their own independent lives, so they didn't question him about the reasons for the divorce. I didn't want to tarnish their image of their father and reveal the truth, so I simply told them that we had grown apart. I didn't want them to get caught in the middle, and, surprisingly, Curtis agreed with me on this. After the divorce, I moved back in with my parents and started working tirelessly. This was the first time in over 2 decades that I could finally pursue my own interests without any constraints or worries. I returned to work at a restaurant, and my sauce business flourished. My children were incredibly supportive. They created a website for me to sell my sauces online, and they promoted it extensively at their colleges. Soon, I was receiving orders nearly every day and had to reduce my restaurant hours to keep up with the demand. My parents' garage became my production area, and my whole family pitched in to help with the process. Later, I started making enough money to rent my own place. The business continued to expand, and within a couple of years, I needed a separate warehouse to produce the sauces on a larger scale. I hired staff and became the owner of a very successful brand, and I cherished every moment. Curtis was not pleased. Even after we had been separated for over 2 years, he continued to harass me, begging me to reconcile. He kept assuring me that he had changed and would treat me better, but they were the same empty promises. I came to the understanding that he had been preventing me from achieving my true capabilities. Now that I was free from him, I was genuinely content. I was now a thriving business owner. Perhaps he had been intimidated by my potential all along, and that's why he had been keeping me down. He would call me sometimes, late at night, and say things like, "You'll never find anyone who loves you like I do. You're nothing without me." I just ignored him. I had moved on and was happy. Getting back into the dating world took some time. After what I experienced with Curtis, I found it hard to trust people. I mostly kept to myself, and I honestly didn't believe I'd find love again. Then I met Albert. It happened in a very natural way. He was a regular customer, always praising my sauces and placing large orders. He even helped me secure a few wholesale contracts. We gradually started chatting and spending time together. I wasn't looking for anything serious, romance wasn't even a consideration. But slowly, I realized I was developing feelings for him. He was nothing like Curtis. Instead of dismissing my ideas, Albert encouraged me to think bigger and expand my business. He listened to my thoughts and made me feel like my opinions had weight. It was incredibly validating. He was a true friend and a huge source of support, and over the course of about a year, our feelings deepened. I fell in love with him. It's hard to describe, but I felt a connection with him that I'd never experienced before. I'd been so undervalued for so long that I hadn't known what real love was until Albert came along. Even Fiona and Louis took to him, which meant the world to me. I was starting to rebuild my life. A few months before everything changed, I noticed a shift in my children's behavior. They became distant, rarely calling or texting, and when they did, they seemed cold and almost disrespectful. Over the following weeks, I tried to reach out to them, but something was clearly wrong. It felt like they were angry with me, but they wouldn't tell me the reason. In the meantime, my business was thriving, and I decided to host a celebration. I invited friends, family, my employees, and colleagues. It was a significant milestone for me. Fiona and Louis initially made excuses, but after a lot of pleading, I managed to get them to agree to come. Albert was away on a business trip and couldn't attend, so I really needed them to be there. The celebration was wonderful. Many people came to share in my success. It was the first time I'd formally acknowledged how far my business had come. If someone had told me even 5 years earlier that my life would change so dramatically for the better, I wouldn't have believed them. In a sense, this party was a celebration of my independence and my achievements. However, my children continued to act aloof. Instead of interacting with me, they stayed in a corner, seemingly uninterested. It was obvious that I had hurt them somehow, but I had absolutely no idea what I had done. Once everyone had arrived, I decided to make a short speech expressing my gratitude, particularly to my children and Albert, without whom none of this would have been possible. While everyone else applauded, Fiona and Louis stormed off towards the back garden. They looked enraged. I was completely bewildered and followed them, only to be met with a barrage of accusations. Louis looked like he was on the verge of tears. When I asked what the problem was, Fiona accused me of being undeserving of my success, calling me a fraud, a cheat, and someone who used people for their own gain. She said she had no idea I was such a horrible person. They had always admired and supported me, but someone had recently revealed the truth about my duplicity, and now they were repulsed by me. Everyone at the party was stunned into silence while my children lashed out at me, accusing me of things I'd never done. I had no clue where they were getting this misinformation, but it was evident they believed whoever had told them. I begged them to tell me who had said these things, but they refused. I remember one of them shouting, "How could you? We looked up to you, how could you be so cruel?" It was a terrible scene. The party was effectively over. My children expressed their hatred for me and believed I was a manipulative person, and I was completely in the dark as to why. My parents attempted to intervene, But my children then declared that they were shocked by my behavior and wanted nothing more to do with me. They didn't want to be associated with someone like me and felt it was best if they cut off all contact. I was devastated and completely lost. My own children, who had always been my greatest champions, now loathed me, and I didn't understand the reason. During the next few weeks, I desperately tried to contact them, but they completely shut me out. Nothing I did or said made any impact. At one point, I even went to their homes to try and talk to them, but they called building security and had me escorted out. I was shattered. I fell into a deep sadness. I suspected Curtis might be involved, so I confronted him, but he denied any involvement, claiming I was imagining things. To add to the pain, Albert and I ended our relationship. He told me his ex-wife was trying to reconcile, and he didn't want to be with someone as emotionally unstable as I was while he was dealing with his own issues. It felt like everything I had worked so hard to build was falling apart. My children, my relationship, everything. The only thing I had left was my company, so I poured all my energy into it. I don't know how my life had taken such a disastrous turn, but I had overcome adversity before, and I was determined to do it again. Within a few months, I managed to significantly increase my production, and soon I received offers for better opportunities in a different state. I had nothing left to lose, so I decided to take a leap of faith and relocate. This would be a fresh start in a new place, and it would also greatly benefit my business. With my parents' help, I moved and dedicated myself completely to my work. For over a year, my children didn't contact me, but I didn't give up hope. I tried to reach out, but they had blocked me on all platforms. Meanwhile, after a few months, Albert came to visit. He said he had been foolish to even consider leaving me when I needed him the most, that he still loved me, and that I was constantly in his thoughts. He apologized, professed his love, and promised he would always support me. I took him back, and we started living together again. Perhaps it was because I felt so alone and despondent, his presence comforted me. And that's how things have been for the past 9 years. Albert and I are still a couple. We haven't married because I don't feel it's necessary. Albert has been a wonderful partner, and aside from that one brief separation, our relationship has been stable. My company has been incredibly successful. However, I had absolutely no contact with my children until a week ago, when my entire world shattered. Fiona called me. She sounded heartbroken and told me that Curtis had passed away and had revealed everything to them. My heart sank. She said that 9 years ago, someone had informed both her and Louis that I was unfaithful and a gold digger. They claimed I had cheated on Curtis numerous times during our marriage and had been disloyal from the start. They also said I was only with him for his money, and during the divorce, I took all his assets to invest in my company. They were shown fabricated documents and other evidence. They were also told that I had no morals or ethics, I only cared about money and how people could serve my interests. I was described as a ruthless woman who drained people of everything they had and then abandoned them, and that I was a skilled manipulator who pretended to be harmless. This person had warned them that I would eventually ruin them and advised them to sever all ties with me permanently. I was in disbelief. When I asked her who had told her all this, her answer made me physically ill. She said it was Albert. I thought it must be some kind of cruel prank, but Fiona continued. She explained that Albert had met with them, divulged all this information, and even presented them with these forged documents. He claimed that I had confided in him about everything and that he couldn't bear the fact that I was such a terrible person and was planning to end our relationship, but he couldn't do so without exposing my true nature to my children. They believed everything he said, which explained their sudden coldness towards me. Then there was the confrontation at the party, after which they cut off all contact. They had questioned Curtis about these accusations, and after initially denying them to protect my reputation, he eventually confirmed that I was a promiscuous and manipulative person. This validated my children's worst fears, and they vowed to have nothing to do with me. For almost a decade, they believed I was a monster. But last week, when Curtis, who had been unwell for some time, took a turn for the worse, he confessed everything. He revealed that Albert was a friend of his, and he had paid him to pretend to fall in love with me, gain my trust, and then completely destroy my life by lying to my children and driving us apart. He admitted that all the documents were fake and that I had never done any of the things I was accused of. After Albert completed the task, Curtis paid him, and he ended our relationship. That was the entire plan. On his deathbed, he confessed that he wanted revenge after the divorce because, despite taking such good care of me throughout our marriage, I still wasn't content, and he wanted me to experience the same pain he felt, so he orchestrated this elaborate scheme. I remember Fiona's voice on the phone, choked with sobs. She said he told us, "He wanted you to suffer, Mom." That moment everything felt surreal. I hung up the phone, feeling numb. I couldn't believe what I had just heard. The worst part was that Albert and I were still together, and he had never once mentioned any of this to me in the past 9 years. For 9 years, I had been living with the man who betrayed me and devastated my life. I didn't know what to do, so I packed a bag, flew to my mother's house, and told her everything. It's been 2 days, and I'm still struggling to process this. Albert has been trying to call, but I've blocked his number. I'm meeting with my children tomorrow, and I have no idea what to expect. How do I even begin to cope with this? I feel utterly lost. One moment I'm feeling numb and the other I just want to scream at the world. Update 1. It's been a lot to process. I didn't realize so many people would see my story. I was just trying to get things off my chest, but I've received so many messages and comments. I'm still working my way through them, but I'm grateful for all the kindness. I know people have been waiting for an update, and I'm sorry it took so long. It's been over a month, and my life has felt like a complete disaster. I just haven't had the energy to write, but I do have something to share. Even after a month, I'm still struggling with what happened. It doesn't feel real. Sometimes, I imagine it's all a bad dream, and I'll wake up and things will be back to normal. My mother is my main source of support. So, yes, I finally met with Fiona and Louie after almost 10 long years of no contact. To say it was emotional is putting it mildly. They embraced me, and we just sat there, not saying a word, for a long time, just taking it all in. They told me they were deeply sorry for everything, for how cruelly they treated me all those years. They said they should have trusted me, not believed Albert so readily, and that they wished they could undo it all. They seemed genuinely remorseful, and it was heartbreaking. I understand how easily people you love can manipulate you. I've experienced that my entire life. I don't hold it against my children, but it still hurts that they believed Albert and Curtis over me, without even hearing my side. I also learned more about Curtis. He had been fighting cancer for over 2 years and finally lost the battle. He only confessed the truth to them because he wanted to die without guilt. Curtis was my husband for 2 decades, but I don't feel sadness about his death. I remember when Fiona told me about Curtis, I thought to myself, that man, always running away, even in death he avoids confrontation. He couldn't even look me in the eyes, not even on his deathbed. As for Albert, all I feel is a deep sense of betrayal and hurt. My children had no idea Albert and I were still together, and when he met with them, he painted me as a dangerous woman and claimed he was going to leave me, which he did for a few months. But why did he come back and stay with me for so long? The agreement he had with Curtis was that after he was paid, he would end things with me. I have so many unanswered questions, but I'm terrified of the answers because I don't think I can handle any more pain. Albert has been trying to reach out. I know he's in the same city and has been coming to my mother's house almost daily, trying to talk to me, but I can't bear to even see him. I just want him to vanish and leave me in peace, but at the same time, I desperately need an explanation. How could he have claimed to love me while betraying me so deeply? I'm so incredibly frustrated, but I've finally agreed to meet with him in a few days. I'll share how it goes. Update 2. So, I met with Albert. It was terrible. He looked awful, like he hadn't slept in weeks. The instant I saw him, I just broke down. Everything came crashing down on me. The man I had loved had betrayed me more profoundly than anyone else. He dropped to his knees and begged for forgiveness. He claimed he only did what Curtis told him to do for the money. He said he hadn't planned on anything else. He had recently gone through a divorce and lost everything, and Curtis was offering him a substantial amount of money. But, he insisted, he hadn't expected to fall in love with me. He said he realized almost immediately that what he was doing was wrong, that he saw I was a kind and genuine person. He claimed he tried to back out, but Curtis threatened him, saying he'd hurt him if he revealed the truth, and Curtis was a dangerous man, so he kept quiet and carried out the plan. After fulfilling his part, he left me, but he claimed he had fallen in love with me and was consumed by guilt for ruining my life. And when he learned that I had moved and my children weren't speaking to me, he decided to re-enter my life and secretly rekindle our relationship. Neither my children nor Curtis knew we were back together. He said that over the past 9 years, he had often wanted to confess everything, but he knew I would leave him if he did. He felt immense guilt, but his love for me was so strong that he kept the secret, and he deeply regrets it. Then, he had the audacity to beg me to forgive him and take him back. He said that now that I knew the truth, we could finally be together honestly and start fresh. I can't believe he even suggested that after everything. I slammed the door in his face. He had the audacity to look me in the eyes and say, I did it for us, so we could be together, free of Curtis's shadow. I wanted to scream. I don't think I'll ever be able to trust anyone enough to love again. Everyone I've loved has ended up hurting and destroying me. Maybe someday I'll be able to confront Albert and tell him exactly how I feel, but for now, all I want is peace. I just want to erase this whole experience from my memory. Life feels incredibly unfair, and I'm going to therapy, but even that doesn't seem to be helping much. I hope things will improve, but right now, I feel completely lost.